Welcome to the FNO InsureTech podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsureTech. We talk about how technology and innovation are affecting and driving change in the industry. Here are your hosts, Lee Boyd and Rob Beller.
Hey, podcast world, we are back after a somewhat vacation? Hiatus, good word. I was searching for that.
Well,
after a hiatus, your favorite podcast in the entire world. That's right, number one. In fact, I think we're currently number one in the whole world in podcasts.
That's what someone told me. I can't verify, but that's what someone told me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll be walking down the street and I'll see somebody on their phone. They're just listening to it. I mean,
yeah. We're so popular, even my wife listens to it. Now they know we're lying. Now they know we're lying.
Now they know. Yeah. We're just kidding. We're not the most popular podcast in the world. But
we are in the InsureTech world.
But you're listening to it right now. So what's that say? We're back and excited to be back. Welcome to FNO InsureTech, our little podcast that we share with you once a week or so. And I've been away. Lee's been busy, but we've cleared the decks, and it mostly driven by the annual celebration that's about to happen in Las Vegas, Nevada. Isn't that right, Lee?
It's so right. It's the Super Bowl of InsureTech. ITC.
ITC is back.
It's back, baby.
Back at Mandalay Bay. Just me, Lee, and 9,000 of our best friends.
Isn't that crazy?
We'll be there. Yeah.
9,000. 7 years ago, 8 years ago, whenever this thing started. And I remember going, and it was a little over 1,000 people. I never thought there'd be 9,000 people who care enough about InsureTech to be there. But there are.
It's so wonderful to go there and to be there and to be with so many people that we know and that we're familiar with, past guests. And we invite you all to drop by and say hi. And we'll be running around like a couple of yo-yos that we are. Also, of course, always looking for party invitations.
Just throwing that out early. Huh?
But mostly secret party invitations, please.
Yeah. The stuff that no one knows about, we want to be in
those. Correct. That's right. That's right.
We don't want to follow a sign this way to the so-and-so party.
No.
Yeah. Off-site, those sort of things.
If you have a sign, don't invite us.
We don't want to get too specific.
But anyways,
we
have a great friend and leader, clearly a leader in this whole business, and that's Caribou Honig, who will enlighten us of what he's up to, where he's living, and what to look forward to.
Yeah, we get to take a little trip down memory lane, kind of how it all started, what he and Jay are up to these days, and a little bit of the growth story. Because as I said, this thing's been around for some years, and it has just blossomed into the Super Bowl of events in the insurance space.
So you don't need to hear any more from us. You'll hear it from him. Here we go with, once again, we think our most frequent guest on our podcast, Caribou Honig from InsureTech Connect. Hey, everybody, we're here with maybe the guest we've had on more times than anybody else on our podcast.
Aren't we lucky?
Perhaps approaching double digits. Perhaps.
We've talked about him a lot.
The only honorary chairman that we ever have on. We have with us again today, ready? Caribou Honig, co-founder and honorary chairman of ITC InsureTech Connect, among other things. Welcome back.
Well, Rob, Lee, thanks so much for having me here.
Welcome.
One of these days, you're going to get tired of me. Your audience probably already is, but I appreciate the chance to talk with you one more time.
We'd love to have you on. We're so glad you're here.
I can't imagine anybody but your wife getting tired of you. You're a delightful character.
A delight. Just a delight.
I keep telling her I'm a delight, and you're right. At a certain point,
she knows better.
She's a little skeptical. I think I'm winning her over, though. So
It just takes time. Just takes time.
So live from Santa Fe, New Mexico, is that right?
That is correct. So became an empty nester about 15 months ago. And about 5 days after dropping the kid off at college, my wife and I loaded the dogs in the SUV and started driving west and resettled into Santa Fe, which we love. And it's a little closer to Las Vegas than
that's true.
Richmond. So that's nice too.
That's true. It's a lot closer. Why Santa Fe? Why Santa Fe?
Why not Santa Fe? The mountains, the culture, the food, the people. Look, at a certain point, Santa Fe, I think most people like visiting it. It's interesting for a little bit different place for a few days. If you don't mind that there aren't a lot of bodies of water and you like 1,000 shades of tan, it's a wonderful place. It's going to be a magical place.
It's a great place.
Get drawn in.
I'll say this. Anybody I know who moves to New Mexico is very happy about it. So there must be something going on there that is very pleasant and enjoyable.
There's a lot of self-selection there. If you ask my sons, age 19 and 21, it's a pretty boring town for me and my wife.
That's okay though, right? As long as you enjoy it and you like it, that's all that matters.
That's right. They're welcome to visit. They don't need to stay.
They can visit anytime. Don't have to stay.
Does this make you the founding member of InsureTech Santa Fe?
It may make me the only member of InsureTech Santa Fe. I'm not sure. Although actually there's like a year or two ago, there was a sort of InsureTech meetup actually in Santa Fe.
Okay.
There's also a regulatory innovation kind of meetup that happens once a year called Smoke Tree.
That's cool.
So there's a little bit here, but look, this is a small city or a big town, depending on your perspective.
So speaking of regulatory, I know you're going to be moderating a panel at ITC, and we'll talk about that for a second, but let's start with just a second of history. This is ITC number which?
7. This is just the audio, so I can count on my fingers.
Yeah, you can count.
I think it's number 7, maybe number 8.
Okay.
And COVID was a blur on this kind of thing.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
right.
We don't count that one year.
Right. And you're here as the honorary chairman. Give us some information of what that is and what.
Yeah. So look, I think most of your listeners will know that along with Jay Weintraub, I co-founded InsureTech Connect. There's the old saying that in your career, you're going to have like at most 3 really good ideas. This happened to be one of my 3 really good ideas. And, we launched it, we built it up. Eventually we sold it, right? It's a real business. It's also our baby. So we have quite a lot of emotional connection to it. But, we eventually got off the cap table, so to speak. And yet, right, we still do everything we can to help see it succeed, both for the event itself, for the organization, but also for the attendees. Like, it's important to do our little part to help move the industry forward and have it be a great experience at ITC. So now I get to be honorary chairman, as you say, rather than I'm really just a nice figurehead. And I always have been a nice figurehead. Like, that's the truth of the matter. Jay and his team did the real work when we were launching and growing it. I just sort of helped on the margins, and I get to keep helping a little bit on the margins. It's good to be a figurehead.
Honestly, you embodied the kind of the vibe of InsureTech Connect for many years. And I mean, it was an extension of you. It was your great idea, or a great idea that you got to first, and you guys executed on it in a really fabulous way. Just to give some context, year 1 was how many people, about roughly?
About 1,500. Don't tell the fire marshal that, but yeah, about 1,500.
And what were you hoping for?
We were hoping for 600 to 1,000. Right?
Wow.
We said to ourselves, if we can get in the very first year 600 to 1,000 attendees, it means that we're onto something. There's value for people, and it's worth doing again.
Mm-hmm.
And we got 1,500, and then the next year we literally, and this never happens, we literally sold out, right, back to the fire marshal, and maxed out at 3,500. And it was so weird because we had people like reaching out at the last minute saying, okay, what can I do to get a ticket? I've got to get a ticket.
How crazy.
It was amazing.
What a great feeling that is.
Well, it is that sort of customer feedback. A lot of us work in industries where you're kind of arm's length from the end customer, from an actual human being,
Right.
It doesn't have to be as bad as they're just a number, but like, you're not really seeing and talking to the end customer in a meaningful way and getting that visceral feedback.
Right.
And one of the things that I've gotten addicted to on the conference side is that emotional feedback from people. It's why I still, when I walk the halls, I try to walk up to people and say, okay, what's working for you here? Like, what's good? What's bad? What's interesting? Have you met anyone that you want to follow up with? It just sort of, I love that kind of feedback loop.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself an InsureTech professional or a conference professional, or both?
Well, as you know, I like to wear hats. And
Yes.
in this case, I get to wear a few different hats. It's a little schizophrenic. When I introduce myself to people, I've noticed that I'm way more interesting if I describe myself as a conference professional. Like,
okay.
I put together thousands of people in industry tech conferences. Like, really? Wow. How does that happen? Where is it? And so on. And then I say, oh, and I also do a bunch of venture capital stuff. And like, oh, okay, sure.
Whatever.
Whereas if I say, oh, yeah, I do venture capital, then it starts out with, oh, well, okay, fine, whatever that means. And then, but I also help bring together thousands of people for industry conferences. And I go, oh, tell me more about that. It's really been a odd experience, I have to admit. Even like insurance professionals are much more interested in hearing what I have to say. I mean, you guys, if I were just another VC, you wouldn't really want me on the podcast. You wouldn't care. I get it. I mean, yeah. But, you helped organize a pretty nice InsureTech conference. Please come on our podcast over and over again.
Yeah. So this year, how many people?
We won't know till we know, but I think it's going to be 9,000 plus.
I was reading online. It looks like over 9,000 people.
Congratulations.
What unbelievable growth. And it's over it's over Halloween,
yes.
Right? So there's some things that I kind of thought it might be down, some friction, but there's a lot going on in Vegas that weekend. But everybody I've talked to said, no, you go to the conference. That's what you got to do.
Well, look, it's also, the Halloween thing. Totally get, of course, and I'm fortunate at this moment to be an empty nester, so that not such a big deal for me. And I mean, look, Halloween in Vegas,
Halloween in Vegas,
one way or the other.
Yes, it could go both ways.
That's right. I think it's still super efficient for people. Who wants to fly to 20 different places to meet with 20 different people when everyone converges on one location? Mm-hmm. You're exhausted by the end, but it still means that you get to have those 20 conversations with just one flight.
So what does it say about InsureTech, the phenomenon, the business, that you've seen this incredible growth, like you said, lots of people wanting to get together and meet and talk all in one spot? Let's talk for a minute about what InsureTech is today from your perspective as somebody who's been involved in it from a couple different directions.
Well, I think InsureTech has followed to a T the classic hype cycle kind of graph. Like, okay, first there was nothing, and then there's this sort of amazing snowball of energy and interest and buzz and hype, and everyone's trying to figure out what's going on, and then a couple companies IPO, and then everything comes back down to a little bit more reality.
Yeah.
And from there, people can then begin the long, hard process of building real businesses over time. And it's much more linear rather than exponential when it's doing that. I saw this in FinTech as well. Right? I was a FinTech investor starting in 2008, and we went through a cycle there. And investors, and to some extent, some entrepreneurs, seem to mistake scalability for sustainability. Like that's my hobgoblin here is it's got to be about building a sustainable and scalable business, right?
Yeah.
Growth at all costs, right, has been tried over and over. And not to say that a handful of people don't get very wealthy if they get the timing right with growth at all costs, but no, it's got to be sustainable. And I think you're seeing now some of the sustainable businesses and products emerge. I'm not going to say that, the history books are closed on that yet. But, I've got my own theories about where the sustainability is going to come from, how you're going to build a sustainable business. I mean, one of my key talking points these days is the focus on a niche opportunity. I actually think that particularly in InsureTech, where, or insurance broadly, right, where it's such a large market, but also a complicated market, you're way better off as an entrepreneur starting with some defined niche where maybe others are good at it, but few or no one else is great at it. And your job is to become great at it. And by the way, that lends itself to actually good sustainable margins, right? And steady growth when you are great at something, competing with a bunch of folks who are merely good at it. And once you become great at it and got some market share, then you can start to earn your way, earn the privilege of getting into adjacencies, whether it's adjacent population segments with a similar product, other products to the same population. But I think that, particularly not so much B2B, but the consumer or customer facing InsureTech, start with a niche, crush it, and then earn your way to moving to adjacency. So, look, I'll give you a couple examples, and I'm talking my own book. I've got economic interest in these companies, so that's my full disclosure. But like Kin in the homeowner space, very focused on Florida, at least for the first few years of its life, starting to expand into additional states now. Florida is a bit of a tricky market. I hear it's a little spicy down there.
That's what I hear.
And if you're not great at it, I think the technical term here is I think you're screwed if you are not great at doing homeowners insurance in Florida, but you're still issuing policies there. It's a tricky market. Can focus on, okay, what do we got to do to be great at Florida homeowners? Now, Florida's still a big niche, right, so to speak.
Right.
But it's a very targeted, specific problem statement there. Another company, jewelry insurance, right? There's a company, Brightco, which is focused on jewelry insurance, which is, again, a niche. I don't think there are many SVPs at big insurance companies whose primary job is solving for jewelry insurance.
Right.
It's an add-on. It's a bolt-on for most of them. There's a couple, monolines focused on it. Fine. But it's the advantage also of being in a niche is it tends to be less intensively competitive. So you can become great at it, and you're not necessarily in a knife fight fighting off 24 other contenders. So I think that's part of what we're seeing. If you ask me what the trends are and what we'll look back 3 years from now, where's the hype gone? I think as the tide washes away, it goes to some of these niche players. To start.
You're talking about the maturation of an industry. And it's basically following the same pattern that almost every industry has followed, over time.
I love your characteristic there, Rob. Maturation of an industry. Insurance is like 400 years old now? It's finally maturing. That's good. It's about time.
That's true. It's really a sub-industry, right?
Yeah.
That's a great point. But we've seen it even in the short time that the three of us have been involved in InsureTech. We've seen just exactly what you're talking about. And we've seen people have enormous ambitions that have crashed to the ground because I think it's easy to underestimate a lot of the incumbents. Stodgy, old, not exciting, boring. But guess what? They're all still here today. And,
right. They haven't disappeared.
Yeah. Depending
on what state you're in, actually. I mean, I'll nudge on that a little bit just for the fun of it. Stick with homeowners, right? Which is, I think, the most, wouldn't be quite right to say the most exciting category today, but it's certainly makes the most headlines. This is part of what created the opportunity for Kin, is seeing lots of the incumbents at least stop writing new policies, if not actually exit the market.
Yeah.
So no, of course, State Farm is still around, but is State Farm writing policies in Florida? I'm not so sure they are.
Well, I think, that it makes me think about the very first conference or two of ITC. You would go 1 year, you would meet these interesting companies, you'd show up the next year and they were gone. They weren't. And it was kind of like you said, it was growth at all cost, but then they realized, how in the world am I going to stabilize this thing? But now you're going to ITC and you are seeing the same companies. And I think you're right that companies are starting to figure out it's not just about this new thing. They're finding that niche and then they're growing from there. Is that something you agree with, Caribou?
Yeah, I think so. Look, at the end of the day, right, there has to be convergence between what the incumbents do and do well and what the startups do and what they do well. One of the, look, there's a really great saying by another VC around, do the startups get distribution before the incumbents get innovation? A great saying, very insightful. I think it is incomplete, but it is accurate. And it's incomplete because it looks at things from kind of a marketing lens, right? And so I would offer an equally incomplete and hopefully accurate variation on it, which is there's also this question of whether the incumbents can get the economies of software before the startups can get the economies of scale. What I mean by that is like when you're starting out as a customer facing full stack or maybe an MGA, you don't have scale, right? Almost by definition, because you're starting out, and it's going to be a while before you have meaningful scale of even the number 12 largest carrier, and so you're going to be at a fundamental short to medium term cost disadvantage during that time, and just like you are. So why do you have any shot at all of competing there? Well, from an operational perspective, because you can get the economies of software. Right, software can make things cheaper to do, in the same way that having scale can make things cheaper to do. So I, as a startup, need to leverage all the economies of software I can get, and I will inexorably, as long as I keep succeeding and growing, I'll get the economies of scale. Like that'll come. The incumbents, right? They start with the scale in effect. Right. And if they're an incumbent and they don't have scale, well, that's a whole nother. They won't be an incumbent for long. Right. And their job is to get the economies of software. And I think they know that, right? There's all these cost efficiencies of sort of refactoring how they do business by using software. And, AI is just another domino in that chain. Yeah, I would say, though, right, it's inexorable that a winning startup will eventually get economies of scale, right? They just need to grow into it. It's not inexorable in the same way for an incumbent to get the economies of software. Right? It's not that just doing more of the same will eventually get them the economies of software. They've got to kind of do things different than in the past to get those benefits.
Yeah. I would like to ask, so I just came back from a conference. It was a program space insurance conference called Target Markets. And one of the big subjects was M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and how it's so big right now. And we can see that a lot in the brokerage space, the agency space. How has the M&A market over the past 7-8 years affected the InsureTechs? And do you think that we'll see a different trend, or do we see the M&A trend continuing in that space? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, look, I think a little bit it does follow the hype cycle we talked about before. And it's always, what are the alternatives if you're in the shoes of the startup or the investors in the startup? If your business is going gangbusters and you built a sustainable business, M&A could be an ultimate path. But, some buyer's going to have to really pay up because I've got a sustainable business. And I don't think buyers right now are all that excited to pay up, quite frankly. A little bit of, okay, let's see how things shake out, because some buyers got burned. I'm not sure that Prudential is all that happy with the multi-billion-dollar acquisition they made a couple of years ago. Maybe they are. I don't have any inside scoop. I'm just like, yeah, it doesn't sound like it quite went to plan. And boy, they paid a solid premium for what they were getting. And hats off to the entrepreneurs there who sold right on that. I think that with the IPO market all but closed means that if I really need large amounts of capital, it's hard for me to get it through that. Private investors, right, PE funds, VC funds are particularly cautious right now. It's not the worst funding market I've seen. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd call it a 3 right now, with a decent shot at getting to a 4 or a 5 next year. But when the funding markets are tighter, it makes M&A more appealing, right? Sometimes, it's the only way to keep things going,
right,
on the entrepreneur. And if I'm the acquirers, again, I think that they're kind of a little bit of wait and see what's real, what's hype. I think that they're just a little cautious.
And valuations?
So I'll speak to InsureTech as part of FinTech broadly, where there's a little more data. During the height of the froth, about 2 years ago, 20x revenue run rate was not unusual. I don't know that it was the average, but it was not unusual. And the long-term average, probably about 10x. So you can see that it was a frothy period. And I'm not even referring to M&A multiples. I'm just referring to, VC funding multiples of these companies. And now it's more like 4x to 6x. Now that's starting to recover. And as you look at the public companies, the ones that IPO'd in the last couple of years in the FinTech arena, you're seeing some recovery. And again, I think a lot of it, I think that like 4x to 6x, like I say, it's about half of the long-term type of multiple. I think that it is actually reflective, what I call Schrodinger's company. For the non-physics majors in the audience there's a really weird thing in quantum mechanics, Schrodinger's cat. In short, you put a cat in a box, you point a gun at the box, you tie the trigger to the state of a subatomic particle. And quantum mechanics says, look, it's until you actually find out the state of that particle, until you actually open the box, it's not that the cat is unknown whether it's dead or alive, it's that it's in a mixed state of being both dead and alive. Right? Very counterintuitive, hard to wrap your head around conceptually, but the math and the experiments kind of support that. Well, I think some of these companies that have gone public are in a sort of Schrodinger's company. Investors aren't sure if the company is dead or alive, right? So they're sort of valuing it as half dead and half alive. Because if it's actually alive, if they built a sustainable long-term business that will cash flow and so on, then, well, these companies with their growth rate, with their margins, they deserve the 10x at least. But if I can't tell if the company's actually, fundamentally bankrupt in its business strategy and eventually headed for the dead pool, then I have to also mix in a 0x. So one of my favorite companies out there, prior investor, a company called Remitly in the international money remittance space. And, it's trading around 5-6x now. It was worse than that. What I would tell people is, look, I know that its current multiple is wrong. It should not be like a 5x multiple. Maybe it should be a 10x. That's reasonable. Maybe it should be a 0x. Fine. Right? I might be mistaken about my thinking it's a great company. And if that's the case, then 0x is totally the right multiple for it. It should go to nothing. But the one thing I know is the sort of midpoint isn't the right multiple. It's just this blend of what's unknown about it.
What is going to bring back, maybe not the froth, but bring back more higher valuation to the market? Is it the cost of money? What's going to drive that back to a place where the InsureTechs are going to be a little happier about it?
You bring up the cost of money, right? Macroeconomics matter. And so that is rightfully going to impact the valuation of everything. Now, valuation and excitement are not the same thing, right? That there's, building big businesses and sustainable businesses that don't necessarily get the highest valuation. Now, as an investor, don't get me wrong, I want to see really good multiples and good exits and so on. But to some extent, that is against the backdrop of monetary policy, fiscal policy, whatever the macro that's going on. I think more specifically, though, for InsureTech, right, separate from the macro, is basically seeing these companies actually deliver the combination of scalability and sustainability.
Fulfill their promise.
Offer some explanation, some rationale about why that they're able to do so. Essentially to demonstrate this great combination of economies of scale and economies of software under one roof. Like, I think that'll get people excited. And then, when you get this next wave of folks doing their IPOs, that will be new beacons, new high watermarks, I think. Because if I'm trying to invest even in an early stage, yet alone a late stage InsureTech, I kind of need to understand, well, what's the exit path? And I think part of the dialogue is, well, gee, if Lemonade is trading under $1 billion, right, and you want me to invest in your Series C at $700 million, where's the upside, right? Because you kind of got to assert at that point that either Lemonade is, way undervalued, or you got to assert that you're just a hell of a lot better company than Lemonade, right? Either are, reasonable arguments you want to make, but you don't have the high watermark.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit to the conference. We're talking about all these companies, and I think there was a little bit of quietness over the past year or two. Some people are thinking that, InsureTechs not quite as big as it was those years. But I'm looking at the map of the floor at the conference, and there are so many fascinating companies that are in this space, and there's even more that I don't even know about yet that I'm excited to go meet at this conference. For anybody who thinks that InsureTech is kind of slowed, I think that map, the floor map, would tell a different story. Is that what you think, Caribou?
Oh, I think there's still tons of energy. I think there's lots of innovation happening. I think a little bit more of the energy has actually shifted from the customer-facing InsureTechs over to the B2B. Look, at the end of the day, an insurance job, right? What's their job? It's to take the baseline technologies, right? Smartphone and AI and satellites and all that good stuff, and productize it in some form or fashion so it can be useful to the insurance industry. That's what your job as an InsureTech is. And there's two main routes to that. You can say, okay, I'm going to, basically take ownership for the entire value chain. And in doing that, I'm going to apply and incorporate those baseline technologies into how I, provide insurance to people and businesses. And that's what I'm going to do. Great. And the rewards of that, if you get it right, can be quite large. The other path for an InsureTech to do its job, so to speak, is to take some baseline technology, build some easily usable product out of it, usable by an insurance company or a reinsurer or a broker, and so that it becomes a better mousetrap as part of their value chain. It's a different strategy. It is, I think, generally a lower risk strategy because you got to be great at solving for that one sort of point solution of it. You also have to be really good at B2B selling, which is a whole different skill set, of course, especially into the insurance industry. But you don't have to be great at everything in insurance, just at that piece of it. So generally, I think the upside is a little bit less, but I think that the risk of it is a little bit lower. Like you don't have to worry, if you're a B2B, you don't have to worry about your loss ratio. You don't need to worry about the unit economics nearly so much, right? If you're basically commercializing, productizing some baseline technology, like if you're not getting 70% plus gross margin on day one, you're doing something wrong, right? Because generally your product is, some sort of software or data or, high margin function in effect.
You're leading a panel in regulation. I've heard you mention and speak about regulation many times. What's your interest from? You have a particular interest in it. Can you talk about that?
Well, look, whatever game we play, we're playing it with some sort of rules, right, of the board. And woe be to the insurer or to the startup that doesn't understand what those rules are and doesn't know how to engage to sort of further, apply those rules integrate them into their business strategy. And so, we don't innovate in a vacuum. Maybe that's my best way to say it. We don't innovate in a vacuum. We need to understand both the letter of the regulations and their spirit to understand, okay, what are they really trying to accomplish? What are the regulators quietly seeking to shut down? And what are they quietly seeking to elevate? And by the way, I think the regulators are broadly very pro-innovation. They just don't want it to, they worry about the unintended knock-on effects way more than the entrepreneur or sometimes even the incumbents might, because that's their job, right? To make sure that the system is protected and the customers are protected, like at the end of the day. And so they've got to be mindful of unintended consequences, but also mindful of unintended consequences of the regulations themselves, right? If they want to see homeowners protected from wildfires,
right,
they've got to be thoughtful about how the regulations on pricing predictions of wildfires are based, right? California has gone through this very, very recently, right? Sort of the regulatory debate around, are insurers allowed to price based on what they believe is the future risk or only price off of historical risk? Well, in a stable world, of course, those should be the same thing. But in a world, if you believe that the propensity for wildfires is increasing compared to the past, well, then it's no surprise that if you can't price off of future risk, then you're going to have a lot of people not willing to price at all. That's at the intersection of regulatory and innovation. And, a lot of the innovators within the incumbents and the startups are trying to figure out things like wildfire risk, right? But if I know I can't price for it, even if I crack the code and say, oh, well, that house has a 10x higher wildfire risk than it used to, well, then what's the point, right? And if there's no point, because the regulations, forget the regulators, not about the people, but if the regulations prohibit it, well, I as a VC am not going to fund making better predictions about wildfire risk in the future, at least not for insurance purposes. So, you start to get a nasty knock-on effects, unintended, I believe, but still pretty nasty. The regulations prohibit pricing off of future risk.
It rolls downhill.
Yeah.
What they do downstream affects a lot of things.
Yeah. So I think it's super informative and interesting to have these conversations with the regulators. When we started ITC, we had 3 pillars we were looking to serve, right? The entrepreneurs, the investors like me, and the innovation executives from within the industry. And after a couple of years, we realized that so our mistake, right? We were blind initially to the 4th pillar, right?
Yeah.
The regulators. So I'm thrilled to have that 4th pillar really, prominent now at ITC.
It's clever that you guys saw that and that you included them. I remember hearing about it the first year. I think you talked about it from the main stage.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Like year 4, you made a huge deal about the number of regulators who were there.
I did have a slide. I'll send you you all this slide. Maybe you can use it for the teaser for this podcast. But my slide basically saying hug a regulator when you see them.
Yeah.
Make them feel well.
I still remember that.
So in the few minutes we have left, what can you plug for us about the conference? What are you looking forward to? What invitations to secret parties do you have for us, et cetera?
Well, I'll tell you the invitations for secret parties after. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure they won't be quite so secret.
Good call. Good call.
Look, I try to keep my calendar actually quite flexible during ITC. It's a little bit of the good fortune of my role at it. I wear the hat, I walk down the halls, people stop me, I get to have interesting conversations, I get the benefit of serendipity. And, I'll peek my head in on a bunch of the panels and speeches and things like that, but I've got a short attention span, so I'll pop my head in, listen for 3 minutes, and then move on to the next thing. And this year, I've got a heck of a dance card. I'm going to be busy. Oh, but normally I don't have this dance card though. Okay, you got to be here, then here, then here, then here, and meet this person. Normally it's like, okay, you got a couple meetings, but otherwise you can wander the hallways like normal. This year, I'll be wandering the hallways. I've got to, otherwise my head will explode. But
right.
I think that it's just there's a lot of interesting people to talk to on sort of every category. Right, there's some startups I'm looking forward to talking with. There's some carriers I'm looking forward to, some brokers. Just the whole shebang.
That's great.
And just before we close, what are you up to? What's your day job now?
My wife asks me that on occasion. My younger son keeps asserting that all I do is play World of Warcraft all day. That's why I'm at my computer. I have primarily 2 day jobs. I'm a conference. I help launch and grow conferences. Like I said, I always start with that. It makes me more interesting. I'm working with Jay. The same Jay is behind ITC. We've got a conference focused on logistics and supply chain tech.
Fascinating.
We've got one on prop tech.
Oh, awesome.
We've got another one coming up in April called Medicarians, which is really focused on age tech, which is an interesting subsector. So, I don't fortunately have to do that much work there because Jay has a real team that does the real work. But I get to be a nuisance, on occasion. And then theoretically, my real day job as a general partner at a VC fund called SemperVirens. We're very focused actually on the employer side of things. And I like to say investing in companies that drive the success of employers or their employees. That covers some FinTech and InsureTech, of course, which is where I tend to get my hands in the weeds. A lot of workforce software, and then actually a lot of healthcare and healthcare tech. Because in the U.S., you're either getting your healthcare from, Medicare, Medicaid, or from your employer. And then, I like to say we deserve to exist because we've got, this sort of amazing ecosystem we've assembled over 100 HR executives, some benefits brokers, some payroll companies that were sort of in the mix. We actually have now, we're at the hopefully home stretch of raising for Fund 3 that we've been investing out of now for a few months. We have several insurance carriers as LPs, and not just as money, but we think of them, and I sure hope that they think of us as strategic in the relationship. There's some hopefully not surprising relationships and value there. So that's
so great.
And you have a little time to watch some of those New Mexico sunsets.
A little bit of time for that. I try to do at least 10 miles of hiking each week when possible. So I don't know if I'll be able to pull that next week when I'm in Vegas, but maybe I'll get in as many steps wandering the ITC halls.
No question. One thing we know for sure, bring good shoes. Well, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And please send our best to Jay. We miss having him on. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon in Las Vegas.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
Thanks so much, Caribou.
Well, once again, the man comes through.
The man, the myth, the legend. He said yes. We asked him.
Yes.
He said yes.
He said yes to the dress.
All those years ago, just out of the blue, you asked him to be on. He said, sure, why not? I like to say yes. And
one of our, maybe our first guest, our first 4 guests.
He was an early guest.
He was one of the first 4.
He was very kind to us, and he's introduced us to numerous people over the years. We've built a little rapport there, and I look forward to seeing him next week. I look forward to seeing him in the hallway.
I think that he's such an important part of the whole ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clearly one of the great characters in the business. So we thank him for being with us, and we thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in Las Vegas. And until then,
goodbye, everybody.